There's a quiet kind of heartbreak that doesn't come with screaming matches or slammed doors. No ultimatums or final showdowns. Just a simple shift, like the creak of a floorboard in a familiar home, that tells you everything has changed. That's how it began for me. I was standing in the kitchen, folding a faded dish towel when the call came. The lawyer's voice was smooth, practiced, almost bored as he explained the details of my parents' estate. Everything, he said, has been left to your brother. That word, everything, hung in the air like smoke. It filled the room. It slipped into my lungs. And I stood there, towel half folded, as if my fingers might finish the motion on their own. They didn't. My brother. The golden boy. The one who could do no wrong. I had paid their bills, their insurance, even their groceries for the past 7 years. When Dad fell ill, I rearranged my life to help. When Mom broke her hip, I drove 5 hours through snow to be at her bedside. I had given them more than money. I had given them my life's pauses, my Saturdays, my sleep, my peace. And in return, a signature on a piece of paper. A decision made behind closed doors. My name absent. I didn't cry. Not then. That came later, in waves, small, choking sobs that caught me off guard while brushing my teeth or stirring my coffee. But in that moment, I felt something colder than grief. I felt erased. Still, I told no one. Not yet. I went on with my days. I stopped paying the utilities. Stopped covering the monthly shortfalls they never acknowledged but always expected me to handle. I didn't call. I didn't visit. I didn't explain. Then, one morning, 30 days after the call, I received a text from my mother. No greeting. No pleasantries. No questions about my health or work or how I was managing in the city alone. Just this. The mortgage is due. Pay it immediately. No punctuation, even. Just command, expectation. As though I were still the quiet daughter with open hands and a closed mouth. I read it twice. Then once more. I thought about all the times I'd clipped coupons to afford groceries while they remodeled their kitchen. The missed birthdays. The ignored calls unless money was involved. I thought of the will. Of the lawyer's voice. Of that one devastating word. Then I typed my reply. Ask the heir. 2 words. No more. I sent it and felt nothing at first. Just a strange stillness. But later, as I lay in bed, I felt something bloom in my chest, something unfamiliar. Not guilt. Not regret. No, this was something else. Freedom. The silence that followed my message was louder than any scream could have been. No reply. No call. Just a heavy stillness, as if even the air had stopped waiting. For a week, my phone didn't buzz with their demands, questions, or thinly veiled guilt trips. The quiet was unsettling at first. Like walking through an old house where every memory is covered in dust. But in that stillness, I began to breathe again. Really breathe. I spent the first day cleaning, wiping down surfaces, scrubbing floors, emptying drawers I hadn't touched in months. It felt like shedding skin. Each discarded receipt, each long-expired coupon, felt like a small rebellion against the life I'd let myself be boxed into. And then I opened the attic. It wasn't even my attic. Just the cramped upper crawl space of my apartment building, filled with forgotten boxes and the ghosts of things no one wanted. But I brought up a chair and sat there, surrounded by broken lamps and holiday wreaths that had long since lost their cheer. It reminded me of the attic in my childhood home. That attic had been my secret place. When things got loud downstairs, arguments disguised as serious discussions, the constant hum of disapproval, I'd slip up there with my flashlight and notebook. I'd draw houses I imagined living in one day. Quiet ones, with soft carpets and warm kitchens, where no one ever raised their voice just to feel heard. I hadn't thought about those drawings in years. I wondered if they were still in that old box, the one labeled Junk, Olivia. My father's handwriting, neat and dismissive. I knew my brother never went up there. He didn't have to. His world was the living room, the center of attention, the golden glow of expectation being met. But me? I was the attic girl. The backup plan. The dependable one. The quiet one. When I left home at 21, I didn't take much. Just enough to fit in the back seat of my used car. I'd built a life from that, bit by bit. Not grand, but mine. A one-bedroom walk-up. A job that didn't light me up, but paid the bills. A cat who liked to sit on my chest at night like a paperweight on my heart. After sending that message, ask the air, I kept waiting for guilt to creep in. But it didn't. Instead, I started remembering. Remembering how I'd drive hours to fix their internet or unclog a drain while my brother posted vacation photos from some resort in Cabo. How my birthday was always unfortunately close to tax season for Dad and right after the holidays for Mom. How my graduation ceremony had to be rushed so they could catch the end of his baseball tournament. And suddenly I knew it had never been about money. It was about worth. I had spent years trying to prove mine, hoping that one more act of service might finally earn a seat at the table. But that table was never set for me. So, I made tea. I curled up in the attic with a blanket and my old sketch pad. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't think about what they needed. I thought about what I wanted. 2 weeks passed. Still no reply. In that time, I began to notice the way my life had shrunk around them, how every choice I'd made had been filtered through a lens of responsibility not my own. I had lived like a moon, orbiting their needs, reflecting their light, hoping to be seen. But now that orbit was broken. I stopped checking my phone reflexively, stopped flinching at the thought of missing something important. Because I finally understood, nothing important ever came from them, not to me. Only expectations masquerading as duty. The first call came from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. My brother's voice was sharp, clipped. Mom's upset. You really should have just handled the mortgage. It's not a big deal for you. Not a big deal. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands trembling not from fear, but from the weight of rage that had no place to go for all those years. That sentence, it's not a big deal for you, carried every shadow I'd lived under. Every moment they assumed my strength meant I owed them my soul. They had made me strong by giving me no other choice. I listened to the voicemail twice. Then I deleted it. I didn't respond. Instead, I went to the small wooden box under my bed, the one filled with unopened letters and yellowed receipts from their past crises. The time I paid off their second car loan. The emergency root canal bill. The late tax penalty from 5 years ago. All quietly handled. No thanks ever given. Just silence or more requests. They had called it love. I had believed them. But now I saw it clearly. I had fed a fire that would never warm me. So I wrote my own list, not of things to do, but things I would no longer do. No more unreciprocated loans. No more answering to texts that felt like invoices. No more hoping they'd become people capable of loving me the way I needed. I lit a candle on my windowsill, the kind with the crackling wood wick. Watched the flame dance, wild and unashamed. And then, slowly, methodically, I burned every unpaid debt of my past, not in flames, but in resolve. I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the way I once was. I was free. And in that freedom, I began to reclaim parts of myself I had buried long ago. Like the sound of my laughter when no one is around. Like my favorite meal made just for me. Like sleeping in on a Sunday without guilt gnawing at my ribs. That's the thing they never taught me. Love without conditions exists. But sometimes, you have to leave your own family to find it. By the third week, the quiet began to hum with a different rhythm. Not absence, but clarity. I no longer jumped at the sound of a message alert. I walked without the weighted dread that had once clung to my shoulders like a second skin. It was as though the version of me who once lived in their shadow had slowly folded her hands and stepped aside. Then came the letter. Not typed. Not formal. But handwritten, in my mother's neat cursive that always reminded me of grocery lists and thank you notes she made me rewrite when I didn't sound grateful enough. It was sealed with care, the kind she reserved for Christmas cards sent to distant relatives she wanted to impress. My name on the envelope looked so gentle, but I knew better. Inside, the letter was brief. We've always counted on you to do what's right. Don't throw away your family over a misunderstanding. Your brother has more responsibilities now. He needs support, not silence. Please come to dinner this Sunday. Let's be civil. Civil. As if we were business acquaintances, not the woman who had once held my mother's hand in the emergency room while she cried over a pain she never explained. Not the daughter who had sat at my father's bedside while he drifted in and out of sleep, feeding him broth spoon by spoon. Civil. That word tasted like ashes. Still, I sat with the letter for a long while. I touched the paper. I imagined her writing it, maybe pausing to reconsider, maybe not. Perhaps this was her way of making peace. Or perhaps it was just another performance, now that the support system she depended on had finally gone quiet. Dinner on Sunday. I didn't RSVP. I didn't text. I simply let the invitation hang in the air like steam from a long-forgotten kettle. And on that Sunday, I made dinner for myself. I cooked slowly, mindfully. My favorite childhood meal, chicken pot pie, but with thyme and garlic the way I always liked it, and they never bothered to remember. I set the table for one. And as I sat down, I realized something extraordinary. I didn't miss them. I missed who I used to pretend they were. The fantasy of family, the illusion that if I gave enough, loved enough, bent enough, I could belong. But I didn't want to belong on those terms anymore. And so, I raised a glass of wine, not in bitterness, but in honor of a new chapter. To boundaries. To truth. To choosing myself. And in the background, my phone vibrated once, then again. I didn't look. The voicemail came late that night. This time, it wasn't clipped or smug. It was hesitant. My brother's voice, quieter than I'd ever heard it, almost unfamiliar. Hey, it's me. Look, I didn't know. About the bills. About how much you were covering. I thought, well, I guess I just assumed Mom and Dad had it under control. I didn't mean for things to turn out like this. A pause. I didn't ask to be the heir. They just said it made more sense. That you were secure. That you didn't need it. That word again. Need. The implication that I existed solely to give, and because I had done it so well, I no longer needed anything. Anyway, if you want to talk, I'm here. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, my reflection dim in the screen. His voice didn't move me the way I expected. There was no anger left to pull from. Just tiredness, and the quiet knowledge that apology without change is just another tactic. I had learned that the hard way. What struck me wasn't his words, but the silence that followed them. The absence of a real question. Of curiosity. He hadn't asked why I stopped paying. He hadn't asked how I was doing. He was simply uncomfortable now that I was no longer absorbing the discomfort for everyone else. I went for a walk that night, wrapped in an old sweater, letting the chill ground me. The streets were empty. The city asleep. The kind of stillness that lets old truths rise like steam from cracked pavement. I remembered a summer when we were children. Our parents had left us in the car for just a minute, which stretched into nearly an hour. The sun turned the air thick, and I'd held my little brother's hand while he cried, whispering stories to keep him calm. When they returned, scolding us for opening the windows, I took the blame. As always. And he'd let me. I don't think he even remembered that day. But I did. Because it was the first time I understood that being needed isn't the same as being loved. Now, I was no longer the buffer. No longer the shield. And they were feeling the sun for the first time. At home, I poured a glass of water and sat on my bed, scrolling through my messages. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a blank note on my phone and began to write not to them, but to the version of me who had stayed far too long in rooms that made her feel small. You are not selfish for saying no. You are not ungrateful for wanting peace. You are not broken for walking away. And finally, you are allowed to choose yourself, even if no one else ever does. That Thursday, a photo appeared in the family group chat. A long dining table, pristine and set with gleaming silverware and matching plates. At its head, an empty chair. No caption. Just the image. I didn't need words to understand. This was a performance. A silent statement. You're missed. You should feel guilty. This is your place, look how vacant it is without you. I stared at the image for a long time. That chair, once mine, had never really belonged to me. It had always come with conditions. Sit here, smile right, be quiet, be grateful. Serve without showing the strain. Perform without ever earning the lead role. That chair had demanded everything. My time, my money, my silence. And now, empty, it had become a weapon. I deleted the photo. I didn't need a seat at that table anymore. I was building a new one slowly, intentionally, from pieces of myself I'd once buried. I started small. Breakfast for one, on real plates, not rushed bites from paper wrappers. A bouquet of daffodils from the corner shop, just because. I bought a journal. Not to track obligations or bills, but to write down the things I loved. The color of the sky at 6:42 p.m. The song that made my chest ache. The taste of the coffee I finally learned to make the way I liked it. Every page, a small rebellion. Every detail, a reclamation. I hadn't realized how much of myself had gone missing until I began finding her again. She was there in the music I hadn't danced to in years. In the emails I never sent to job postings I once thought were out of reach. In the mirror, beneath tired eyes and quiet strength. She was me. And she had always deserved more. That weekend, I walked past a home goods store and saw a wooden chair in the window. Oak, with soft curves and a fabric seat. Nothing extraordinary. But it reminded me of that picture. I stepped inside and bought it. I took it home, placed it by the window where the light came in strong each morning, and sat there with my coffee the next day. No one had to set the table for me. I was setting it for myself now. And in the stillness, I smiled, not out of bitterness, but out of something much rarer. Relief. 2 weeks later, another letter came. This time from the estate lawyer. It was thin, one sheet, no warmth in the paper, no softness in the wording. Just facts. Legal clarity. The final disbursements had begun. My parents' assets were being transferred. All accounts, all property, all valuables, to my brother. There it was again. No mention of my name. No thank you for the years I paid their overdue bills. No acknowledgement of the holidays I'd spent alone because they'd forgotten to tell me plans had changed. No memory of the nights I stayed up figuring out how to keep the electricity on in their house while I sat in the dark in mine. They had rewritten the ending without me, but strangely, it didn't sting like I thought it would. It was a quiet confirmation of something I had always suspected, that I was loved only in utility, valued when needed, forgotten when no longer useful. This wasn't an inheritance of wealth. It was the passing down of a legacy of silence. The kind that asks a woman to smile while she's overlooked, that tells her she should feel lucky to be needed, even when she's never chosen. I placed the letter in a folder labeled closure and slid it into my drawer. That night, I lit a candle. Not in mourning, but in ceremony. I sat by the window in the chair I'd bought for myself and made a list of everything I was no longer responsible for. Their approval. Their comfort at my expense. Their carefully crafted illusions. Then I made a new list. Things I was becoming responsible for. My joy. My solitude when I chose it. My voice. It was strange at first, writing down things like joy as a responsibility. But I realized I had spent so long surviving their needs that I had forgotten how to tend to my own. The next morning, I received another text from my brother. You could still get something if you just talk to Mom. She's willing to compromise. As if love was negotiable. As if scraps were better than dignity. I didn't reply. Instead, I went to the park with a book. The sun was soft, the kind that warms the back of your neck like an old friend. A little girl was blowing bubbles nearby, her laughter bubbling up higher than the soap itself. I closed my eyes and let the wind carry away the echoes of their voices. I was not angry anymore. I was awake. There is something sacred in being forgotten. Not in the way it hurts, but in the way it frees. Without their constant gaze, I was no longer a mirror for their pride or their pity. I was just me, for the first time in years, maybe ever. And that me was a stranger I was slowly starting to recognize. Her voice was softer, but steady. She took long walks and let herself stop just to admire the shape of a leaf. She sang again, off-key but free. She bought books with broken spines from secondhand stores and underlined phrases that felt like tiny resurrections. I found an old notebook while cleaning, the kind I used in college, spiral-bound, scribbled margins, hopes hidden between assignments. On the first page, written in my younger hand, were 3 words: be someone else. And beneath it, crossed out so hard the page was torn. No, be you. I traced the line with my fingers, remembering how scared I was back then to disappoint them. How I once chose a degree I didn't love because my mother said art isn't a real future. How I skipped the study abroad program I dreamed of because my father muttered irresponsible. I remembered sitting in the hallway outside their bedroom at 17, listening to them argue about whether I was too sensitive or just selfish. I remembered shrinking again and again until I mistook the shape of my silence for the shape of my worth. But not anymore. That night, I wrote my name at the top of a clean sheet of paper. Olivia. Just the name. No roles. No titles. No context. Just me. And I stared at it until it stopped looking like a question and began to look like a beginning. They could keep the inheritance. I was reclaiming something far more valuable. Myself. Sometimes, I still dream about that old house. The one I helped save from foreclosure 3 winters ago with a loan I never got back. The one where I retiled the bathroom myself while Dad watched from his recliner, muttering about the grout lines not being straight enough. The house they said I was lucky to be allowed to stay in for a few months after my last breakup, as if it weren't my money that kept the lights on. I dreamed I was walking through its hallway, barefoot, and the floor creaked beneath my feet, not out of age, but accusation. Like it remembered everything I'd poured into it. Like it, too, knew I wasn't welcome. And then I woke up. I made coffee and stared out the window of my small apartment. The radiator clanked like an old man clearing his throat, and the faucet still dripped no matter how tightly I turned the handle. But it was mine. There was no manipulation hidden in the lease. No conditional affection behind the walls. No silence waiting to be punished. Here, I could breathe. I spent that morning on the balcony, tending to my little container garden. Just herbs and 2 tomato plants. Nothing fancy. But the first bud had appeared on the basil. Tiny, green, full of promise. I smiled without thinking. And then, almost like a test, my phone lit up again. Mother. I stared at the name. The word didn't feel like it fit anymore. It belonged to someone who should have protected me, nurtured me, not guilt, and drained me until I couldn't tell where she ended and I began. I let the call ring out. No voicemail this time. Just that same stubborn silence that always came when she was waiting for me to make the next move. To be the bigger person. To smooth things over. But this time, I wasn't moving. I sat back, let the sun touch my face, and whispered the truth I was finally ready to say out loud. I don't owe you my peace. It didn't sound bitter. It didn't feel cruel. It was just honest. They built their house on conditional love, guilt, and selective memory. I was building mine on something better. Truth. Boundaries. Self-respect. And when the time came, it would not creak under the weight of betrayal. It would hold me, steady and strong. It was a Tuesday, gray, humid, the kind of weather that makes everything feel heavier. When the knock came, I wasn't expecting anyone. My circle had shrunk to a few close friends who understood the sacredness of texting first. But this knock was soft, cautious. The kind that doesn't demand, just lingers. I opened the door to find my brother. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not in size, but in presence. The confident tilt of his head was gone. His hands, always animated, were tucked in his pockets. "Can I come in?" he asked. I hesitated for only a second before stepping aside. Not out of obligation, but because I was no longer afraid of what his presence might unearth. We sat at the kitchen table, the one I'd found secondhand, and refinished myself. He looked around like he didn't know what to make of it. Of me. "I didn't come to argue," he said, voice low. I wanted to see you. And maybe say some things I should have said years ago." I waited. He cleared his throat. "I didn't understand. I really didn't. They always said you were strong, that you didn't need help, that you liked taking care of things." I laughed softly. Not mockingly. Just tired. "Did they ever say how much it cost me?" He looked down. "No, they didn't." We sat in silence for a while, the kind that had weight but not war. "They're struggling without you," he said eventually. "Bills are piling up. Mom keeps saying you'll come to your senses." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean, go back to funding their lives while they leave me out of the will?" He flinched. "I didn't ask for it. The inheritance." "I know," I said. "But you didn't refuse it either." More silence. Finally, he looked at me. Really looked. "I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know if I can. But I'm sorry. I let them convince me that you were fine. And I benefited from your silence." I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just nodded. Because it was true. And truth has a way of making everything else unnecessary. "I don't need you to fix it," I said quietly. "I just need you to stop pretending it didn't happen." He nodded back. And for the first time, maybe ever, I saw the boy I once protected from the heat in that parked car. Still waiting for someone to open the door. But this time, I wouldn't be the one to carry him out. I led him to the door. "Take care of them if you choose. But don't come looking for me to make it easier." He paused on the step. "Can we talk again sometime?" "Maybe," I said. "When the reason isn't guilt." He didn't argue. Just nodded and left. And as the door clicked shut, I felt a strange peace settle over me. Not because I'd been hurt, but because I hadn't needed to yell to be understood. After my brother left, I stood by the door for a long time. Not because I wished he would come back, but because I was tracing the quiet in the room. Measuring it like a seamstress might trace a hem, seeing how well it fit. It was the first time in years that silence didn't feel like exile. It felt earned. Mine. That night, I walked through my apartment slowly, touched each surface. Every picture, every plant, every book on the shelf, these were things I had chosen. Not for their usefulness to anyone else, but because they made me feel alive. There were no photos of my parents. No smiling portraits of holidays where I had stood just slightly behind, slightly to the side. Not forgotten, just blurred. Like a background object no one bothers to focus on. I'd removed the last of those years ago, when I realized that no matter how pretty the frame, some memories weren't meant for display. Instead, on my walls hung prints of women with wings. Abstract pieces that burned in orange and blue. And one small handwritten note, framed in gold. "You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep others warm." A therapist I briefly saw had given me that quote. I only saw her for 3 sessions, couldn't afford more at the time, but that one sentence had stayed with me longer than most relationships. I lit a candle before bed. Chamomile and bergamot. The kind that smells like a dream someone once whispered into a teacup. As the flame flickered, I looked around at the space I had built for myself. And I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to believe. I was proud. Not the kind of pride they celebrated, degrees and promotions and charitable donations made for tax benefits, but quiet, rooted pride. The kind that grows in the dark. The kind that doesn't need applause. I had survived what they never acknowledged. I had loved them while bleeding. I had handed them my umbrella during storms and watched them run off with it, leaving me soaked and shivering. And now I was dry. Now I was whole. I turned off the lights and slipped into bed, not to escape the world, but to rest in it. No more waiting for the next ask. No more jumping at the sound of guilt disguised as concern. No more mirrors that only reflected who they wanted me to be. Just me, unseen by them. But finally, beautifully seen by myself. I have a drawer of unsent letters. Some are scribbled on napkins, some typed out in the dead of night when the weight of unspoken things becomes unbearable. I never intended to send them, but I needed to write them, to release what was rotting inside. One was to my mother. You taught me to say thank you even when I wasn't given anything. You taught me that love meant sacrificing first and asking later. You never said those words out loud, but your silences taught me better than any sermon. Another was to my father. I saw how tired you were, how you let the world wound you into silence. I watched you disappear behind your newspaper, your remote control, your tax spreadsheets. And I inherited that same talent for vanishing, except I did it in plain sight. And of course, one to my brother. You weren't cruel, just careless. And sometimes, that's worse. Because I kept forgiving you for what you didn't even know you were doing. You moved through life like someone who expected doors to open, and I was always on the other side, turning the knob for you. I never planned to send them. But last night, I reread them all. Not to dwell in the past, but to measure how far I've come. I used to write in desperation. Now I read in distance. The ache is still there, but it's quieter now. Less a wound, more a scar. A reminder of what I survived, and a map of the places I no longer live. I folded the letters neatly and tied them with twine. Not to romanticize the pain, but to acknowledge it. To give it a resting place. Some people burn their letters. But I didn't want to destroy these. I wanted to keep them as proof. Proof that I tried. Proof that I loved them, even when it cost me everything. Proof that I stopped not because I ceased to love, but because I finally started loving myself. The drawer closed with a gentle click. Not final. Just firm. A boundary, not a barricade. That's what healing looks like, I think. Not forgetting. Not erasing. But choosing what deserves space in your story, and what doesn't. It's strange how quiet life becomes when you stop trying to be heard by the wrong people. There was a time I would have done anything to be invited in, to their dinners, their decisions, their definitions of success. I would have changed my voice, my clothes, my choices. I would have sacrificed the quiet beauty of my own truth just to sit at a table where I was always half seen. Now, I listen for a different sound. My own footsteps in the early morning, padding across the floor to make coffee. The soft murmur of rain on the roof as I read a novel under a blanket I bought for myself, not because it matched anyone's taste, but because it felt like warmth. The echo of my own laughter while watching some ridiculous movie alone, not lonely. The world has not stopped turning without their praise. My lungs still fill. The sky still blushes at sunset. And not a single moment has required their permission. Still, the past has a way of whispering when you least expect it. This time, it came through a mutual cousin, texting me out of the blue. Just so you know, your mom's telling people you've been unstable lately. That you're lashing out because of stress. I laughed when I read it. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. There it was again, the need to reshape the narrative, to preserve their image. If I wasn't compliant, I must be broken. If I wasn't quiet, I must be in crisis. I didn't reply. Because I've finally understood something so liberating, it feels like flying. I don't need to defend myself to people who only ever heard me when I was apologizing. They will call it bitterness. They will call it rebellion. They might even call it cruelty. But what it truly is truth. And truth doesn't need a publicist. It just needs a place to live. So I opened the window, let the wind stir the curtains, and said aloud, "Let them talk. I'm done explaining my healing to those who harmed me." The wind answered with a hush. And in it, I heard the echo of someone new. Me. For years, my yes was currency. A trade. A bribe. A way to buy peace, even if the cost was always mine. Yes, I'll cover the utility bill this month again. Yes, I can cancel my plans and drive you to the doctor. Yes, I'll loan you the money, even though I know I won't see it again. My yes was a reflex, not a choice. It lived in my throat like a default setting. But each time I said it, a part of me dimmed. A small light inside flickered a little weaker, until one day, there wasn't enough left to even feel warm. Now my yes means something different. Yesterday, I said yes to myself. Yes to waking up late with no apology. Yes to fresh flowers from the market, just because they were the color of hope. Yes to a chocolate croissant at 3 p.m. and eating it slowly like a poem. Yes to ignoring my phone. Yes to starting a painting, even if I never finish it. These weren't grand acts of rebellion. Just small, sacred permissions. But each one felt like reclaiming a piece of my name. Later, as I stood at the kitchen sink rinsing out my coffee cup, the sunlight caught on the rim and scattered a little rainbow across the wall. I stood there and watched it for longer than made sense. Just standing. Just breathing. And in that ordinary moment, I realized my life is no longer shaped by their emergencies. It is shaped by my choices. By the moments I claim. By the peace I allow. By the gentle yes I now reserve only for what feeds me. I am no longer a reservoir for their needs. I am a wellspring of my own. And every time I say yes now, it tastes like honey. Like home. It's a myth that closure comes from the other person. We wait for it, letters, apologies, acknowledgments that rarely arrive. We imagine the scene, them realizing what they did, them reaching out, them finally saying what we always needed to hear. But more often, closure is a quiet choice. One we make alone. I used to think I needed a grand confrontation. Some moment where I could stand tall, voice unwavering, and list every betrayal, every dismissal. But the truth is, most wounds don't come with an audience. They come in whispers. In moments where no one was watching and no one believed you'd remember. But I did. Like the time my mother praised my brother's report card while pretending not to see mine on the table, despite the perfect scores. Or the birthday they forgot because the water bill was due. Or the day I came home in tears and was told, "Don't make everything about you." Those moments didn't need yelling. They needed grief. So I've been grieving. Slowly, without ceremony. And I've also been healing. The door to that chapter wasn't slammed. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just stopped knocking. I didn't close the door to my family. I simply stopped holding it open while they walked past me like I wasn't standing there. And in the stillness that followed, I found something unexpected. Peace. Not the kind you have to earn. The kind that exists when you're no longer at war with yourself. I still think of them sometimes. Not with anger, but with distance. Like old neighbors you once lived next to, close enough to know the shape of their lives, but far enough to forget their noise. The door remains, but I no longer wait by it. I walk past it now, barefoot, with soft music playing and soup simmering on the stove. And that, I've learned, is closure enough. Funny how sometimes it's strangers who hold space for us better than our own blood. I've met more grace in the quiet barista who remembers my order than in years of family dinners. More warmth in the dog walker who waves every morning. More honest curiosity in the librarian who once asked if I was okay, just because my eyes looked tired. It's a strange kind of healing, realizing that love isn't always loud. That recognition doesn't have to come from history. Sometimes it comes from presence. There's a woman who owns the flower stall 2 blocks from my apartment. We've never exchanged more than a few sentences, names, a compliment here and there. But last week, I paused to admire her arrangement of marigolds, and she said, "You always stop for the yellow ones." I blinked. "I do." She nodded. "Every time. Even when it rains." That stayed with me. The way she'd noticed something even I hadn't. Because that's what I'd always wanted, to be seen in the details. Not just when I accomplished something, or when I fixed something, or when I gave more than I had. But seen in passing, for no reason other than existing. My family looked through me for years. Past me, around me, over me, but rarely at me. But here was this florist, watching me choose flowers like it meant something. And it did. I bought a small bouquet that day. Yellow marigolds, tucked into brown paper. At home, I placed them by my window in a chipped ceramic vase I found at a thrift store. They opened slowly, day by day, like they knew they were safe here. And I whispered to them, like I was telling a secret to myself. You deserve to be noticed for more than what you survive. There is a quiet tax for choosing yourself. It's not one people warn you about, not like student loans or rent increases. No, this tax is hidden in glances, in silence, in the way people begin to speak of you when they realize they can no longer use you. She's changed. She's distant. She thinks she's better than us. That's the cost. Not money, but reputation. Not rejection, but distortion. When I started setting boundaries, they called it coldness. When I stopped answering every crisis, they said I was selfish. When I chose peace over performance, they called it abandonment. And maybe, in a way, it was. I was abandoning the version of myself who had abandoned herself for too long. It's strange how even our own healing can offend the ones who benefited from our wounds. But I don't regret it, because each day now, I wake up not wondering who I need to please, but how I want to feel. And that shift, that tiny, revolutionary shift, has rebuilt my world from the inside out. The other night, I lit candles around the bathtub, played my favorite old jazz record, and let the water cradle me like a mother should have. I stayed until the music ended and my fingers were pruned and soft. I didn't answer texts. I didn't check emails. I didn't explain. I just was. Unapologetically present in a moment I would have once rushed through for someone else's comfort. Becoming myself hasn't been cheap. But I have never made a more worthy investment. I've started taking stock, not of what I own, but of what I hold. There's a difference. Owning is transactional. It's what they taught me to value. Bank balances, property lines, heirlooms passed down like guilt in silk-lined boxes. But holding, that's something else. It's more sacred, more intimate. So I made a new kind of inventory. I hold quiet mornings with warm tea and soft socks. I hold the memory of surviving things I never thought I could. I hold conversations with friends who don't need me to shrink to feel big. I hold laughter that spills out without apology. I hold boundaries that once felt like walls, but now feel like doors I can choose to open or close. I hold stories, mine, unpolished, imperfect, but finally honest. This inventory doesn't come with dollar signs. There's no deed, no certificate, but it's worth more than any inheritance they withheld. And unlike their approval, it can't be revoked. I used to believe I needed their validation to feel real. That if I wasn't included in the will, I must not have mattered. That love needed signatures and clauses and notarized affection. But here, in this life I'm slowly building, I've learned something radical. Enough isn't about what's given to you. It's about what you no longer need to beg for. And I'm done begging. I folded away the last of my old family documents, birth certificates, old photos, a worn-out address book, and slid them into a drawer I no longer open. My future isn't in those pages. It's in this breath. This moment. This decision to choose myself over and over again. And for the first time, my hands don't feel empty. They feel full. There's a special kind of grief in realizing that the people who raised you never really knew you. Not the way you cried in your room after every family gathering, the tears hot with shame and confusion. Not the way you folded your dreams into smaller shapes, trying to make them fit inside their expectations. Not the way your voice always trembled a little when asking for help because you knew it would come with conditions. They knew the version of me they built. But they didn't know the girl who stayed late at work just to avoid going home. Or the woman who sometimes sat in the dark, trying to remember what peace felt like. That's why I stopped waiting for their understanding. I started introducing myself to me instead. The me who loves thunderstorms and black coffee and books with sad endings. The me who hums under her breath while washing dishes and who sings at the top of her lungs when no one's home. The me who can walk into a room without needing to prove her worth. I said my name aloud one morning, just to hear it unburdened. Olivia. It didn't sound like a disappointment. It didn't echo with shame. It sounded like a beginning. Because that's the truth no one tells you. You can be born into a family and still have to give birth to yourself later. And I am mid-labor, breathless and brave, pushing through years of silence and self-sacrifice to finally emerge whole. The name they used to summon me into service, Olivia, can you cover this bill? Olivia, can you run this errand? Is now the name I used to call myself home. Not to their house, but to my own skin. They used to say, we did our best. As if that absolved everything. As if effort were the same as care, and tradition a substitute for tenderness. We loved you the only way we knew how. But their kind of love was all rules and sacrifice, with me always on the losing end. Love that demanded silence. Love that made me prove myself again and again, only to move the goalpost each time I got close. Love that said, family first, but never meant me. It's hard to unlearn the belief that pain is proof of loyalty. That love must be earned. That being needed is the same as being cherished. I stayed too long in that belief. Bent myself like wire, hoping to hold together a foundation already cracked from secrets and pride. And when I finally let go, when I stopped calling, stopped paying, stopped rescuing, I was told I was cruel. Ungrateful. Ungrateful for what? For being tolerated? No. I will not apologize for refusing to live on scraps while they feasted on my silence. Real love doesn't need to be explained in whispers or justified in therapy. Real love makes room. Real love takes responsibility. Real love doesn't punish you for walking away from harm. I don't hate them. I just no longer believe that what they gave me was love. It was dependence dressed in devotion. Control stitched with care. And I deserve better than love that only shows up when I'm useful. So I light a candle tonight, not in mourning, but in thanks. Thank you for what you taught me through your absence. Thank you for forcing me to find the kind of love that doesn't leave bruises in my heart. Thank you for making me brave enough to leave a place I never truly belonged. Because now I am learning how to love myself the way I always needed them to. Gently. Honestly. Without fear. I used to carry my family like luggage. Neatly packed guilt. Carefully folded expectations. Memories tucked into corners like old sweaters, too worn to wear, too sentimental to discard. Everywhere I went, I brought them with me. To job interviews, where I heard their voice in my head, reminding me not to ask for too much. To relationships, where I kept trying to prove I was low maintenance and easy to love, because anything else felt like a risk. To doctors' offices, where I downplayed my pain because I'd been taught that others always had it worse. I carried them into every room, even when I walked in alone. Until one day, I couldn't anymore. It wasn't dramatic. No final breaking point. Just a quiet morning where I looked in the mirror and realized I didn't recognize the woman staring back. She looked tired, not just from lack of sleep, but from the weight of years spent performing someone else's idea of goodness. So I started setting it down. One guilt-laced phone call ignored. One no said without apology. One unmet expectation left unmet. And each time, I felt lighter. Not just emotionally, but in my bones. Like I had been carrying bricks inside my chest and was finally beginning to unload. I used to think strength meant endurance. Now I know it means discernment. Knowing what to carry and what to let go. My parents still don't understand. They still ask questions that sound like accusations. They still measure my absence like a deficit. But I don't. I measure my days now in breaths I don't have to hold, in laughter that isn't stifled, in moments that belong only to me. I didn't abandon my family. I abandoned the version of myself who thought she wasn't allowed to live freely unless they approved. That's not betrayal. That's liberation. There was a mirror in my parents' house, long, rectangular, hung too high on the hallway wall. As a child, I had to stand on tiptoe to see myself in it. I remember squinting into the glass, trying to catch a glimpse of who I was. Not just my reflection, but something deeper. Some confirmation that I was there, that I mattered. But the mirror always made me feel far away, like I was borrowing the space I stood in. Even as an adult, visiting during holidays, I avoided that mirror. It didn't show me, it showed the version of me they expected. The helper, the caretaker, the one who never said no. I didn't see myself in that house. I saw a performance. Now, in my own space, I have a different mirror. It's old, slightly chipped in the corner, a thrift store find. But when I look into it, I see someone real. Not polished. Not perfect. But whole. I see the lines around my eyes from years of worry and laughter. I see the strength in my shoulders, built from carrying too much for too long. I see softness, too, the kind I used to tuck away, afraid it would be mistaken for weakness. This mirror doesn't lie. It tells me, you're here. You survived. You are allowed to take up space. I touch the glass sometimes, gently, as if to say thank you. Thank you for showing me myself, not the role I was assigned. Thank you for reflecting truth, not duty. There's power in being seen. But there's more power in finally seeing yourself. And that is what I'm learning to do, every day a little more. To look. To acknowledge. To say without shame or need for approval. I am still here. And I am enough. There was a time when joy felt dangerous. Like a luxury I couldn't afford. I was so used to scanning the horizon for the next crisis, so used to anticipating someone else's disappointment, that I forgot what it felt like to simply be happy without permission. But now I've begun counting my joys. Not the grand, Instagram-worthy moments. Just the quiet ones. The ones that come without fanfare, without applause. The kind that pass like a breeze, but leave something behind. Today, I counted 5. The sound of birds at 6:17 a.m. before the world began demanding things. A soft sweatshirt pulled fresh from the dryer. A stranger's dog wagging its tail just for me. The first bite of toast with cinnamon and butter, still warm. My own laughter, unprompted, while reading a chapter of a novel that made me forget everything else for a minute. These joys do not owe anything to anyone. They do not ask for sacrifice. They do not come wrapped in guilt. They arrive and leave gently, asking nothing except that I notice. And I do, because I know now what it's like to live without them. When I was wrapped in the machinery of my family's need, there was no space for joy. Only obligation. Only the endless lists of what I should be doing, saying, giving. Joy was selfish, they implied. And selfish was the worst thing I could be. But I've learned, selfish is not evil. Selfish is survival. Sometimes, selfish is the first step towards sacred. So I let myself enjoy things now. I dance in my apartment in socks. I spend too much time choosing a shade of lipstick. I let my soup simmer longer just for the smell. I laugh too loudly at things that only I find funny. Because these are the things that remind me I'm alive, not just breathing, but living. Joy doesn't need a reason. It just needs room. And I am finally, beautifully making space. They gave me many things, lessons, limits, lines drawn in sand and sealed in silence. But the one thing they never gave me was permission. Permission to fail. To rest. To want more. To ask for love without having to prove I deserved it first. Everything had strings. Every yes came with an invisible debt. Every act of kindness was something I'd be reminded of later, repackaged as proof of how much they had done for me, never mind how often I had done the same. They never taught me how to receive, only how to give until I disappeared. So I am giving myself the gift they withheld. I am saying, yes, you can be tired. Yes, you can stop trying. Yes, you can want things just for the wanting. Yes, you are allowed to make a home inside your own skin, without explanation. I used to flinch at compliments, brushing them off as if accepting them would make me vain. I used to say it's nothing when people thanked me because I believed my worth came from doing more than enough and asking for less than I needed. Now I practice saying thank you. Just that. Now I rest without guilt, dream without shame, cry without apologizing. I have become both parent and child to myself. I tuck myself in at night with gentle thoughts. I celebrate small wins. I forgive my own mistakes without berating the mirror. This is the gift they never gave. But it's mine now, and I give it freely. to the girl I was, to the woman I am, to the soul still learning that love does not need permission, it simply is. Every now and then, I write to the life I used to imagine. The one I thought would make them proud. It had a neat house with shutters the color of approval. A job with a title that made them nod. A partner who fit the mold. A family who gathered for holidays with matching sweaters and polite smiles. I wrote letters to that life for years, hoping it would write back with instructions. Hoping it would tell me I was close, that I just needed to sacrifice a little more. But it never did, because that life wasn't mine. It was a mask, a borrowed script, a costume stitched from everyone else's expectations. Now, I write to a different life, the one I am living. The one where mornings begin with breath, not busyness. Where relationships are chosen, not inherited. Where my worth isn't weighed against my usefulness. And this life writes back. It writes back in the smell of fresh bread and the weight of a blanket pulled just right. It writes back in messages from friends who check in not because they need something, but because they care. It writes back in silence that isn't cold, but comforting. It tells me I am exactly where I am meant to be. And for the first time, I believe it. Because I no longer chase a life that fits into their picture frame. I hang my own portraits now, crooked, colorful, imperfect, but mine. And every letter I write to this life ends the same way. Thank you for waiting while I found the courage to arrive.